got some good ones lined up tonight. Some good tips and tricks to go over and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, these new creative sauce videos. I mean, since they came out with this cakewalk update, I've seen his cakewalk tips in the past, and these are full of all sorts of new useful tips. And I hope he eventually does one on this project integration feature that they've added on. They're really smoothing it out. Each revision that has come out in the last month and a half, and they've almost come out with one like every week, has refined the whole process of downloading your whole project, doing all your mixing, and putting it back up. Chris Lynn put a post up earlier showing a trick on how you can just select your tracks and then right click and push them right back up into BandLab right from your track view.
Right.
That's the kind of tips that I'm hoping I'm gonna see visually. A lot of times for me, until I see somebody do it, I don't end up figuring it out. A lot of the interface when it comes to like Cakewalk and a lot of these DAWs, they're not intuitive on figuring out process. You know, the tooltips aren't there. You've got to roll your mouse in a very specific place just to get an option. You kind of have to watch and see it done a couple of times before it sticks.
Yeah. Starts to make more sense after that for sure. I was going to share his main page so that we could see the listing of all the different videos he has, just so we can see this is creative sauce on YouTube. And
yeah, his cakewalk videos alone is a whole library.
We're gonna probably check out the 5 cakewalk.
But on top of his cakewalk videos,
yep, he's got all kinds of other stuff. He just did a featured artist live the other night. I think he streamed that 9 hours ago. I was watching some on Cakewalk Secrets, some on plugins, some on addictive drums, workspaces, just all kinds of good stuff. So we can definitely go through a lot of these over time, but just anybody else out there, feel free to check them out.
I like his category breakups too. Like, you know, between plugin reviews, DAWs, every one of those categories is an interesting category to me.
Yeah, definitely good stuff. Do you want to jump right into one of the Cakewalk Secrets ones, or do you want to do something different first?
Yeah, I'd actually like to take a look at that. You said there's a 2 different Cakewalk Secrets that he's come out with. The first one, which I think is that one over to the right, and then there's the more one.
Yep.
If the first one is the one that the tips that I was trying to incorporate, but I couldn't remember. I remembered him saying how to do it, but I couldn't remember how to do it while I was working on my project. And I was like thinking, I need to review that and see what the procedure is.
Yeah, check it out.
In this video, I'm going to give you 5 secret cakewalk tips that might just save your life. Obviously, not literally. You can't actually die from not knowing how to convert audio into MIDI, for example. Or can you? Hi folks, I'm Mike, and I hope you're well. Now, before we get started, I'm thinking about making this a regular segment where I just give you 5 quick tips to do with Cakewalk, which are hopefully fun and easy to implement. Let me know in the comments down below if this is something you'd like me to do regularly. Now, for this video, I've put them in a particular order, starting off with number 5. I think this is the one that you're most likely to already know about, unless you're kind of a new beginner in terms of Cakewalk. The last one, however, is something that I reckon probably at least 90% of you don't know about. So stick around for that. Let's get started with number 5. Oh, already done that bit.
5.
So here's the scenario. You've been working on this song for a while now. You've been doing a number of edits on different tracks, and you've changed their size as you work on them, like so. You've made some bigger, you've made some smaller to get them out of the way, and you end up with this higgledy-piggledy kind of mess. As I scroll down through this song here, you can see there's all different heights of track here. Now, that's not a great use of screen real estate, so you want to do a bit of a tidy up. So you think, well, I'll make them all smaller again, or at least all the same size. So you go through and you start dragging around like this. And then after about 10 seconds or so, you get really, really bored and you start to do something else, because who wants to do that? You want to change the height of them all at the same time. It's very easy to do, and I'm going to show you how to do it now. First of all, I want you to press Control A on the keyboard to select all of the tracks like so. Now, as you start to drag out the bottom of a track, like say this one here, this red one, hold Shift on the keyboard and ping, hey presto, they all go to the same size. As you drag your mouse up and down, they will all retain that size. That's very, very cool, and you've cleaned up your sort of interface there quite nicely. Now, if you go to one of these tracks, I'll go to this red one here, it doesn't matter which one, I'll right click and I'll go down to the bottom of this little pop-up here and I'll go Set as Default Height. Okay, now what's going to happen now is as I add a new track in, I'll insert an audio track here, it inserts at the same height. Very nice way to keep tidy. Now, you may have gotten into this mess in the first place because you kind of ignored one of the great features of Cakewalk, in my opinion, and that's the auto track zoom feature. This is going to let you expand tracks on the fly as you use them, and they'll go back to the default size when you've stopped using them. Really easy to use. So you go up to view up the top here, and then you go down to auto track zoom, you switch that on like so. They'll all come to this sort of default size down here again.
That's what I was looking for.
So what we need to do is go to the active track, this one at the top here, which is active, and expand that to the sort of size that we may want it to be if we were working on it. Now, as we click to another track, this is where the magic happens. You click on it and hey, look at that. It just automatically zooms in on the track that you are working on. Now, if you want to make all of the other tracks, the inactive tracks, if you like, a different size, just go to one of them and adjust the size, and they will all uniformly adjust in size. Okay, so you can click on piano here, so on and so forth, and that really keeps your workspace really nicely organized.
4.
Now, a quick heads up with this next tip, you do need Melodyne installed for this one to work, but it will work with the most basic version of Melodyne. If you haven't tried out the demo of Melodyne yet, this may be a good chance to try it out and see if you're going to like it or not. So if you're like me and you're not a great keyboard player, I think we know this, but you can ad-lib a bit with your voice.
And this is right up Noiser's alley.
Blah, blah, blah,
What we were talking about with Noiser?
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously not that one.
This is right there.
This is a really fun way to turn those ad-libbed melodies into instrument parts. So let's take a look at what we're going to do here. I've got this guitar part here. Let's just have a listen. This may be familiar to regular viewers of the channel, this particular guitar part. And what I've done is I've ad-libbed this kind of melody over the top of it with my voice. We'll have a listen to that. Okay, fine, that's enough of that. Just notice right at the beginning of that, I kind of slid into the first note. Have a listen. I don't know if you picked that up. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Remember that. So what we're going to do is take this audio part here, this sort of quick vocal I've recorded, and we're going to drag it down onto this MIDI track here. This is a MIDI track which is hooked up to a virtual synth with a violin sound on it. Okay, so no, this is not an audio track, a MIDI track. And we're going to drag this audio onto it like so. Bing! And it pops up with this little dialogue asking us what type of algorithm we'd like to use. Now, there could be all kinds of different choices here depending on your version of Melodyne, I think. But I'm going to choose Melody. I think that's the basic thing that you will get. And I'm going to click on OK. Does its little bit of magic, and we can see there that some MIDI notes have already appeared. Let me just mute that original vocal. Let's have a listen to this violin part now. Now, I may well want to go in and do some editing and things. I think some of the velocities there, could have had that note, for example, there could have been a bit louder. But you get the gist. You may have to do a little bit of editing, but it's a really cool way, I find, of kind of ad-libbing some really organic sounding melodies. If you're not a great keyboard player and ad-libbing on the keyboard is not your strength, I think this is a really fun thing to do. I've used it for several tracks for solo parts of solo instruments. Why did I say that? Anyway, let's go on to the next tip. So here's a life tip. The darkness of your soul can have some brightness in it just by showing appreciation to others. So do me a favor. If you're finding this video useful, go ahead and hit the like button for me. Do it now so you don't forget. And if you won't do it for me, do it for the Gretsch. The Gretsch needs you. Next tip.
3,
So we're getting organized again with our tracks with some track sorting. Okay, now of course you can move around tracks manually. If you don't know how to do that, just hover over a blank area like this on a track until those sort of up and down arrows appear, and then you can just drag your track around like so. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to quickly sort them by a certain criteria, you can do that. Go up to the tracks menu at the top there, click on sort tracks, and you'll get a number of different ways to sort your tracks. Now you've got name at the top there. That's one way you could organize things. We'll click on OK.
I love
there.
this.
Now, that may not make an awful lot of sense, but once you know
Sorting by
that
type
this
or by
feature
name,
exists, it may make you rethink the way you name things. You may come up with a bit of a naming convention. For example, all of your different drums, you may decide to put a capital D at the beginning, D kick, D snare, D hi-hat, knowing that in the future you may use this feature and you could organize your session really, really quickly in that way. That's one way you could do it. I like the fact that you can do things like sort here by muted. So if I go down to muted, click on OK, then all of those tracks that I don't really use anymore, I kind of want to keep them, but I don't use them. I'll go down to the bottom. They're all at the end there, for example. So it's a really, really quick way to sort things like that out. So that's the track sort feature. You may not have known it existed, but you do now.
2,
Okay, so you've got your project, it's progressing well, and you're probably finding you're using the scroll bars at the top and the sides quite a lot to navigate around like so, or you may be using your mouse wheel to navigate up and down, and you may even use the tip that we talked about at the beginning of this video where you're resizing tracks uniformly and so on, so you can zoom into sections of the song. What if I told you there may be a better way of doing it by using a feature which seems a little bit forgotten in the Cakewalk community? I'm talking about the navigator. Okay, we're going to go up to view at the top here and then go down to navigator down there. Of course, we could also press Alt, Shift and 8 to open it, but we'll use the menu here for now. Click on that and that opens it up at the bottom of the screen here. Now I'm just going to grab the top of it and drag it down because it's obviously a little bit too big for this particular project. Now this gives us kind of a whole map of our project in one area, and we can take this blue box which is there in the middle and we can drag it around to quickly go to different parts of our song. Okay, and once you get to know your song and you know, hey, look, there's a lot of things going down here, you know, a certain bunch of instruments come in here, I can just quickly move there and deal with them, okay, without having to scroll around or search for things. So it's visually quite good for getting around, but I think it becomes more powerful when we start to resize this blue box. So for example, we can go to the left and the right side of it and we can zoom into things by changing its size. So now as we move it around, everything's a little bit more zoomed in. We can work on the details quickly. But what I really like about it is when we start to drag the top and the bottom of this box up and down. So I'll just grab the bottom of it, I'll drag it out, and you can see that the tracks are starting to resize there. Yeah, okay. Now as I drag it all the way out, they all go really small like that. Okay, they're all now the same size, and then when I push it back up again, they all expand, they get bigger, but they're doing it uniformly. They're all staying the same size now. So we can make it like so, and now everything is zoomed in both horizontally and vertically. Now that's great. Now if I really quickly just want to whip to that other part of the song, I can just grab that blue box and go bang, I'm there really, really quickly and sort of reasonably precisely as well. So if you didn't know about the navigator, give it a go for one project, see if it becomes useful to you. Now we're going to move on to our final tip, and I just promise you now, because you're probably wondering, it's got nothing to do with track organization or zooming or anything like that. Completely different, and I think you're going to love it.
1,
Don't you just hate it when you've been using Cakewalk for 30 years and you discover a feature which has probably been there for years and it's incredibly useful, but you only just found out about it? Well, that's one of those. I'm going
And
to show
I've
it to you
been
now. I just
using it for
love this
30
particular
years.
tip. So we've got this
Nice.
track here, and there's some vocals I have with a plug-in here. I'm using this intensity reverb from Arturia, just probably my favorite reverb, and I've got it on this vocal here. Let's just have a listen.
You've taken my heart and you give it up. I'm trying to figure.
And I find, for example, just hypothetically, that a control that I go for a lot in this to adjust it is going to be the size control here. Okay, I'll just make it really big. Have a listen.
You've taken my heart and you give it up.
Or you can hear the tail of that. Isn't that glorious? But anyway, so there's some controls that you frequently use and lots that you don't, yeah. And it's a bit of a pain to have to open up the whole plugin just to adjust that, right? So you don't actually have to do that. So in order to get around this, we're going to use something called assignable controls. So I'm going to go up to the top here to where it says options, click on options, go down to effects, and then click on show assignable controls. Now, on your console, this whole new bunch of stuff appears with each track. That's if you have some effects in there. So I've got this intensity effect there. That's the only effect I've got. Now what it does is it automatically assigns 4 controls here to the first 4 that it finds to do with this plugin. Okay, now that may not be very useful, so let's look at how we can assign one of these to that size control. So I'll just right click on it here, okay, and then I'll go down to reassign control, and then I'm just going to look at all of the controls available to me from that plugin, and I'll click on size. Okay, now I can simply drag this grey bar backwards and forwards like so, just like a little slider, and I can adjust that parameter without having to open up the plugin every time like so. Okay, so really you can get in there very, very quickly to do this. Now this is going to be very
I am gonna
useful,
use
yes,
that.
especially for plugins like compressors, where you've got 4 main controls. You've got you've got threshold, you've got attack, release, and you've got ratio, and you could assign those 4 controls there, and you don't have to keep opening up that plugin. But I'm going to show you something now which is really, really cool just to add to this. So I've got this size control here, and I can right click on it here. I'm going to go down to remote control. Okay, now I've got a MIDI keyboard attached out of shot. You can't see it here. It's my Arturia Key Labs keyboard, and I've got lots of knobs and sliders on there. You've probably got them on your keyboard as well, and they can send messages via MIDI to adjust things. So I'm just going to wiggle one of my sliders backwards and forward at the moment. I'm going to click on the learn button here. Click on that. You can see that it's automatically picked up some activity, this controller 73, which is one of the sliders on my keyboard. I'll click on OK, and you can see now that as I move the slider on my keyboard, that size parameter is also moving, so I can play the track.
You've taken
That
my
learn
heart
tip
and you give it up.
is a new one for me. I love that.
Exactly.
Make adjustments like that, even from my hardware as well. I think this is brilliant. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you already knew about this and haven't told me, yeah, then let me know in the comments down below. Say, hey Mike, I'm a smart ass, but I don't share. As I said at the beginning, I will make regular videos like this if you guys want me to. So let me know about that with your likes and your comments down below. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Like.
Check out the link.
Yep. Like right there. Boom. I'm not going to unlike it. I already like it.
A lot more. I've already liked it too. I've liked it on all my YouTube accounts. Creative Sauce. That is definitely a YouTube channel for whether you're going there for the cakewalk tips, which are awesome, or just the general audio tips. His categories are diversified on audio production.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, that one for just learning the controls, I mean, that's awesome. You don't have to know how to control your keyboard. You just have to know, like, wiggle the button that you want to use and it'll go.
I
That's
wasn't
awesome.
aware. I wasn't aware there was a learn in there. I love with all these tips, he was basically focusing on like aesthetic tips. You know me, like I always want my screen to look a certain way, and I like to see all my tracks, and all these tips led to good screen aesthetics to lay out everything and how to snap your tracks universally. They're all good production tips.
And those
They're
tips
not the
all take,
ones that are going to make the better sounding audio, but they're the ones that are going to make the process and the workflow a lot easier to deal with.
and smoother workflow does lead to better product at the end because you're
Eventually,
wasting less time.
yeah, eventually you're not distracted by all the crap on your screen and you're actually focused on what you're trying to do with the sound. Tip number 1 and tip number 3 are the ones that I was specifically looking for. I'd remembered them from the last time I'd seen it, but now I remember the where he brought the menu up, because again, where the menus are for some of these settings, you got to roll over the right thing, bring up a context menu, and then you see the option,
Nice.
and it helps to know what you're looking for.
Most definitely.
That last tip, though, is the one that I sort of remembered from before, but now I have to reinforce in my brain. I have to utilize it. That's going to be such a time saver. Those assignable controls, especially with the MIDI controls. Any of you guys out there that have these like MIDI controllers that you get now for like $100, and they come with all these knobs and sliders, using that learn button and doing it that way, you can make that slider turn into your volume knob for that track.
Yep. And a lot of
I
the
need to start doing that.
and a lot of the effects that you would be controlling with that are going to have only 3 or 4 things that you would normally want to move back and forth anyway, whether sometimes it's only 1 or 2.
Yeah, the beauty of it is that with my Phantom here, I've got 8 programmable sliders with 4 knobs on top of it that I can program. So for everything that I might want to do on any given track, I can make all of these do something on a specific track. And then the beauty is that whatever track you have selected while you're working on something, these sliders are relevant to whatever I have selected.
Yep.
So I don't have to reprogram them for every single track. I simply have to set up my templates. There are like 5, 6 things that I'm constantly messing with, with the mouse that I really don't need to. All I got to do is map them, use that learn button, and once it's in there, every time I'm on a track with the same parameters, those knobs will change what I expect them to.
Yep.
I think that's going to be super useful for me.
Yeah, it should be huge. Save you a lot of time.
Yeah. Plus, this is automated. So when it changes there, it changes here. I love it.
Nice. Motorized.
Yeah, I never took advantage of it. I mean, it comes with software and does it in its own little Roland environment, but making it universal to these DAWs is just a matter of mapping it. That's the problem with keyboards nowadays. They come with all sorts of cool stuff in controllers, but whether they talk to your DAW, some keyboards are not created to just talk to every DAW. They come with templates, usually for the popular ones. Fortunately, Cakewalk's always been one. So the whole reason why I love Cakewalk more than anything else is it has instrument profiles for all my Rolands, my Yamaha, and my Ensoniq. When you're a keyboardist, that's what you're looking for in your DAW, that it recognizes your keyboard.
Yep. And being able to use all the controls that you want to do all the stuff that you need. And again, the learn function just takes all the guesswork out as far as having to figure out how to make your thing talk to that. Yeah.
All you have to do is move the slider, turn the knob, and while it's listening, it's saying, hey, which knob is turning? That's the beauty of MIDI. MIDI is, if you're in Omni mode, MIDI's always listening, So if Cakewalk's running and it's in Omni mode, any MIDI controller that's sending a signal, Omni's picking it all up. What you do with that signal and how you route it, that's the part of MIDI. It's like networking, I'm sending on channel 1. Well, channel 1 is talking to a synthesizer that's listening, and on channel 1, it's playing a piano. If I start playing on channel 2, well, that same synthesizer set on channel 2 for some strings. As long as you route your MIDI, you can make one thing respond to it. But with MIDI Omni, that's what that learn button is useful for, because any MIDI signal from anything plugged in right now, if it's learning, it'll say, I know what I just got and where I got it from. And from now on, if you want that to do something, tell me what you want it to do. And that's how the learn approach goes.
Yep.
Show me the knob, and then
And then-
I'll reprogram it.
Yep. And it tells you, what do you want me to do with it? Yep.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
That's the work we keyboarders have to do to get all of our stuff working. You bassists and guitarists, you're lucky. You can pretty much come in, plug a cable in, and then anything you do afterwards gets complicated. Your effects and stuff are almost as complicated as synthesis, but you're lucky that getting your initial signal is just a matter of plugging a cable in.
And you're lucky on the standpoint that your stuff doesn't go out of tune. So that is one of the things,
True.
like plugging in our cable and then tuning up. That's important. Like a lot of people forget that part.
Although,
but
ironically, I do have an old keyboard here that has gone out of tune on its own. An actual digital keyboard that is no longer knows its tuning properly.
well, there are usually fine controls for that on them, depending on how old it is. But you can
No,
usually
it's
do some
really
fine
old.
tuning.
It's 1992.
Wow,
Old.
not quite antique, but yeah, getting
it's
there.
the first keyboard I actually first loan I ever got was for a keyboard, not a car.
Yep, that's where you know your priorities are right.
I wanted to drive with sound. I didn't care if I had a vehicle, but
You're like, I can catch a ride.
I needed
but
that.
I can catch a ride, but I need to make music.
It was a weighted keyboard. It was
it's
the
important.
first weighted keyboard to come out. Up until that point, you know, synthesizers were trying to get the piano feel, but they were all plastic and never felt like a piano unless you went and bought a digital piano. And at the time, I almost went the digital piano route because I really needed something that felt like a piano. That was the compromise. It was an Ensoniq KS32, like $3,000 at the time, but it had 88 full ivory weighted keys, first of a kind for the synthesizer world, and
Nice.
I could not resist.
I haven't sat at an actual piano in a long time until today. I was over at my sister's house and I sat at the upright and I started hitting the keys, and I had forgotten how heavy piano keys are. Like, you know,
Well,
and how
uprights
hard
are
it is to play
nice.
quiet.
Uprights are nice because they're almost like synthesizer versions of pianos as far as the bounce and the action. An
Mhm.
upright almost feels like a keyboard to me. I can play bouncier stuff with it.
Yeah, like I was saying, my nephew was playing a little bit of Moonlight Sonata for me down there. That was very cool.
Mm.
It's a
And
good
that's
piece.
where they can sound really good. They uprights tend to have that nice bass for that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. But the
Yeah.
weighted keys are very big.
The only upright I ever had, our neighbor gave it to us and it was out of tune, and I never got it into good enough tune where it would have been worth me using. But it was also a player piano.
Oh, nice. With the piano roll and you plug the thing in and go nuts. It's good when that happens. I don't think we ever had a player piano, but at one point we did have a couple of baby grands that we'd had for me to learn on. And that was nice.
Oh, did I bounce there for a second?
Just for a second.
Funny.
I was
Nice,
talking about the
funny.
baby grand.
Yeah, that's what I had upstairs. The baby grand that I had just got sold last November when we moved.
Right.
Yeah, and apparently the guy tuned it back up because it had gone out of tune over the years. It doesn't take a lot for a piano to lose its tune,
Right.
especially if you don't play it.
They actually have different size pin blocks in there as well. Like there's the main block that all the strings connect to, and the pins that they use to screw each string in. You can go larger and larger on those pins because if the piano starts going out of tune, you can use a larger pin so that it'll hold better. But eventually that'll start going out also. So even on even on the Steinway that we had from way back when.
Oh, you had a Steinway?
Yeah, baby grand in the.
You got to play on one? Oh my God, man! I would have never gotten up.
Yeah, it was definitely cool. But the problem was that there were a couple of notes that even with the oversized pins, like the largest pins you could get in the pin block, there were still a couple of notes that would go out of tune, but it was like 2 notes
Yeah.
And I knew which ones they were. And I just knew that anytime I would sit down at the piano, the first thing I would do is hit those couple of notes and retune them, because I had a tuning hammer right there, and I would just tune them
I
back up.
knew I never was inclined to actually mess with the piano, but I did know all my problematic notes across it. Playing for hours, eventually you know which notes. A few of them, I eventually like they started to mute a little bit.
Right, right.
So sometimes I would use that strategically. There was a few keys that had kind of gone bad that I would use to like actually make a certain sound. I had a theme with marching forward with a D minor march that I was building a bunch of parts off of, mainly because that one bad D that I had would give kind of like a thunka 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 as I would hit it. So I would
Nice.
use it like a almost like a muted guitar,
A little percussive sound in there. Yeah.
make some lemonade out of this bad key that's I can't pay to get fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good plan.
It's actually one of the ones I got recorded in my piano works.
Nice.
You could hear the thunk in the key.
Yeah, but that Steinway definitely felt awesome. I mean, that was one of those things that was the piano that I grew up playing, and I still stepped away from music entirely for 20, almost 30 years. But I was mostly just playing a little bit of guitar here and there over those years. But we were talking before about the piano lessons and how I would describe it as how my piano lessons didn't quite stick. Like, I learned a lot of theory, I did scales, I learned pieces, but going forward, when I stopped taking the lessons, I really didn't sit down at the piano again for decades. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I'd started playing keyboard again with a couple of my bands where I play bass, but they wanted me to, try out, bass, or try out guitar, keyboard,
and
drums.
now you're playing that kind of piano that's like the electric piano and the organ, the stuff that goes with the stuff that Beck and Pepe play.
Yep.
That groovy stuff that you can do with the keyboards. That's a lot more fun.
Definitely.
With the synths than the traditional piano stuff you might have practiced back when you were trying to learn.
Yeah, because when I was learning, it was all classical. So it was really, I wasn't learning different styles. I wasn't listening to, or I wasn't trying to play like the rock songs that I was listening to. I was basically just doing classical and scales and that kind of stuff. So that's part of the reason probably why it never stuck in the first place, was the fact that it was just not my main focus for music. That I was, what I was playing wasn't really what I was listening to all the time. But at the same time, it's what I grew up listening to, because my dad's a fantastic pianist, and just all the Chopin and the Mozart, just all the stuff that he would play. Anytime I hear classical piano now, it just always takes me back to my childhood, because I hear those songs and I'm like, oh, those songs were like drilled, like he'd be playing those in the house all the time when I was a kid.
And that's the stuff that gives you the creative ideas when you're adding your parts and the techniques and the melodies that you come up with. It shows from that early kind of influence. Classical influence is a great influence as a kid in
Definitely.
music. It's where I came from. Everything else was from an understanding based on that music foundation.
I just wish I'd learned more open-ended piano. Like I wish I'd learned what the scales, what the end goal was, right? Like it seemed like it was just a never-ending series of scales that every week I'm going to have a new scale to learn.
Well, if you're playing in the classical approach, it was all about like practice and endless scales, and a lot of the music's written that way. It sounds like it's endless scales. Ironically, like even modern music isn't much different in some cases. You go through generations of music where like that 70s metal could have been like the same kind of classical approach, except they were doing those scales with guitars this time.
But if they'd started by saying like, okay, here's a song and it's a 1-4-5 in the key of C, like that kind of information would have been way more useful to me, I think, in terms of keeping me interested, because now I could make my own music and say, oh, well, here's a 1-4-5 in C. Well, I can translate that to B. Here's a 1-4-5 in B. That I can do, like, make those shifts and then play something different, even though the fingering is all different. And you have to worry. And then again, that's where the scales come in, is being comfortable with the fingering and the correct fingering in the scales to be able to move quickly up and down in any key. But you'll start out with the keys that have less sharps and flats, and you'll move your way to the more complicated keys. The one that was on one of Angie's screens there is something about F flat minor or something like that, and that's got, I think, 3 flats and 4 double flats, so it's just a really
Oh yeah.
ugly key. It's one of those things where it'll really mess your head up if you're trying to calculate it out, but when you actually start looking at it, it's not nearly as bad as you thought it was. You just have to do the same, whole half, that whole, figuring out the relation between this note to the next note, whole half, whole half, and figuring out where you're trying to
You
get
have
to.
to convince your fingers. If you're doing it on a keyboard, it is trickier because the distance and pattern is different. Uh, I really do like the idea of like picking up a guitar and then practicing this stuff over there where you're dealing with just a shift in distance.
Exactly.
The patterns and the what you're having to muscle memory it seems so much simpler if you start with a guitar to do that. On a
Definitely.
keyboard, I've been doing it for over 30 years and I've never found a comfortable, easy way to shift into some of those keys.
Yep. And that's where we were talking before also about cheating on some of these keyboards where you can just hit the transpose key. And so even if you only
Yeah,
know half of the keys, so you're comfortable with these half and
sure.
the other half, not so much.
I fortunately never had to cheat and use my transpose key, but if I was in a like job situation where it's like, wow, I got to go play these songs tonight. And I can play all those songs. I just can't play them necessarily in some of the keys that they might get played in. In that kind of situation, I could totally see like saying, yeah, I can do this job and just use it to play in the key that I can play it because I know the chord combinations.
That's actually even
That's the other
another one.
part of memorizing. But after you get done memorizing the scales, memorizing the chord progressions, that's what I've spent the last like 25 years as to do songwriting. It's all about like 1 5 4 1 7 5 1. Whatever you're doing there becomes more the practice than the scales and shit.
The other thing I would think about for the transpose key would be to hear a song that you're comfortable playing in a different key to see how it changes the mood. Because
Yeah,
something in C major is going to sound different than it's going to sound in F sharp major, for
yeah.
example, just so that, just by using that transpose, you could transpose up 6 and then, see what it sounds like that. And you're still
You
playing it the same way. So you're tricking your fingers, but
you guys got to be noticing that with me all the time if I'm like working out like a something. You might hear the same exact thing in a different key like 2 seconds later.
sure.
If it sounds different, it's because it's a different key, but chances are I'm almost always like
That is another big one on the differences between the piano and the keyboard. Where on the guitar, if you're just shifting, it's the same pattern as you mentioned. So you're just shifting from here to here. You shift up a fret, you get something different, but it'll still sound the same in terms of the speed of the notes that you're hitting. Whereas on the
one
keyboard,
day one day I played the same song in G major and C major, and she wrote two different killer songs off of them,
yep, and that's the bonus
and very different, like very different meaning songs.
because it's all about how those particular chord tones, particular notes
Yeah.
hit you at that moment. And this one might be more melancholy, this one might be more happy, this one's more wistful. There's all different emotion in there.
Yeah, it's the brightness
Yep.
difference.
Yep. Going back to our buddy with new jazz and the different modes there.
Yeah, see, G seems to be more bright.
Yeah. G major is always one of the happiest keys
Yeah,
to me.
that seems to be like the consensus.
Definitely cool. Did you want to check out another one of the Creative Sauce videos, the other 5-minute video?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
other 5 tips.
The extra tips. I'm curious to see if he goes from the aesthetics tips to where he goes from there, because with some of these new features and with automation, because he just dabbled on the automation with that last tip. The final one was a hint at just how you can automate everything in your track and learn it to a control so that you can actually control it from there and tell.
Because then you can be recording it and making changes on the fly just using that. Let me see here. Oh, let's go with the other one.
Letting you change anything.
Yep. Makes it very flexible.
Yeah.
Because you can use it to change this or that.
This MIDI controller here can tell that effects in Cakewalk to bring down its preset.
Yep. And again, this is creative sauce. If you're not following, you definitely should be.
Yeah.
And 5 more cakewalk secrets you should know.
Pull a tip about freezing a large track in Cakewalk by BandLab. The tip of the iceberg. You know, it's a frozen track. Iceberg. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. Back by popular demand, I've got 5 more fabulous, amazing, life-saving cakewalk secrets or tips for you today. They're in no particular
They can be
order.
life-saving.
Let's get started with my
Not
first.
bullshitting.
You can find us. Once in a while, we have to deal with some clipping in Cakewalk. You can see here in this second to last bus on the right-hand side here that the last time I played this song, this bus did clip. We've got a couple of red markers there at the top of the meter. And then below the meter, we can see it peaked at 0.5 dB. So it's gone 0.5 dB over 0, which means we're getting a little bit of digital clipping there. We don't want that. So where did that happen? Well, I'm going to show you how to find out where the highest levels are, either on tracks or on buses in Cakewalk using some peak tools. So I'm going to close the console here so we can go to the track view here, and then I'm going to go up to options, then I'm going to go down to meter options, and then go down to where it says show track peak meters. Okay, so I'll click on that and you can see right away that there's some little green flags have appeared on my tracks. Okay, if I play over a section, you'll
I've
see
accidentally turned this on.
I'll just play it for a moment.
You're always telling me that you're here to stay. I wake up in the morning and you've gone away.
Now, if I allow it to keep playing, then that's going to be updated on these other tracks as well. So I can clearly see from the sections I've played exactly where.
Now, you might not want to keep that on all the time,
What if I want to do
but
that?
while you're analyzing, it's super useful.
Definitely.
That's one of those ones that, like, the reason it's not on by default is because it's a lot of work and you don't want to be doing it while you're recording and doing your shit. But after you're done and you're mixing and you're wondering why that channel hits those little clips, you can run that track and analyze it.
And that's where it's definitely helpful because it'll tell you right where you got to hone in and try to fix and either try to bring something down a little bit or how you're going to take care of it.
I had accidentally found this feature by, like, you know, when sometimes you hit the wrong keys the wrong times and stuff comes up and you're like, what's going on? I'd accidentally found this. Now I know what it is and I know how to turn it on and off like that. Much more useful now.
Definitely.
A bus. At the moment in this view, we are only showing these tracks like so. You can show the buses, including the master bus. If you go down to the bottom and just click on this little icon here, I'll just click on that. There may be a keyboard shortcut for that, which I've forgotten at the moment. So let me know in the comments down below if you know that keyboard shortcut. So now we have a little section here. We've got a divider. I'll just drag that up. We've got a little section here which shows all the buses. Now what we can do is go up to options at the top again. Just click on that, go down to meter options again, and then click on show bus peak meters. So I'll press that and then I'll just play my song again.
You're always telling me that you're here to stay. I wake up in the morning and you.
And conveniently, we can also easily see that this one is peaked because it's showing this bright red flag there as well. So we can visually see right away that that's where the highest peak has occurred at that point when we've played this section of the song. Now, another little last tip on this is you can quickly go to the peak by going over here on the left hand side there. You can see where it's showing the peak number there, 0.5. Right click on that and then you can click on go to peak and it's going to move the playhead.
Again, super useful.
Another really good one.
So some little tips
Hell yeah.
for finding the loudest part of a track or a whole song. So there are basically 2 groups of effects that we use in Cakewalk. There's the Pro Channel modules, and then there's everything else, which includes
Love
VST,
those Pro channels.
DirectX effects. We can see them over here on this first channel in my project, this vocal channel. If I expand the Pro Channel here by clicking on this little icon, you can see the modules that I'm using there in the Pro Channel, and I'll just pop that back in there, and then below that you can see
It's nice
the
having it
other
all
effects that we've
consolidated
inserted there.
like that,
So the
too.
routing goes from the
Yeah.
top to the bottom. So we start off with the gain control at the top, then it works its way down through the Pro Channel modules. When it's finished with those, it then goes on to the effects section and works its way down through those. But what if you want to mix them up? What if you want to have some, say, VST or direct effects in between some of the Pro Channel modules? You can do that, and you may have missed this. So I'll open up that Pro Channel there, and I'm going to go down to a point where I want to insert a different effect. So I want something in between, say, this EQ
So it's kind of
module
like Rewire.
module
It
here.
is.
So I'll right click on the header.
I did not know you could do that with the Pro Channel.
Insert module, and then I go across to effects chain here.
Oh.
And that inserts an effects chain. I can then just go ahead and insert my other type.
One important thing, just to go back to that real quick, was looking at everything else that's here: console emulator, bus,
yeah.
channel, leveler, rematrix, saturation. I mean, all these different things that you can just drop right in one shot.
For
Definitely
free.
cool to know. Yep,
For
and they're all there
free.
already.
On that, and that inserts an effects chain. I can then just go ahead and insert my other types of effects as I normally would. So I'll just click on plus here, insert audio effects, and let's go down to Cakewalk and insert, for example, I don't know, Sonatus reverb. We'll pop that in there. Okay, so I've got Sonatus reverb in there, and look, you can even rename that if you like. So I just double clicked on where it says effects chain, and I put reverb.
Well, yeah, once you start having a bunch of them, you're gonna want to rename it.
Yep, gotta keep track of that
between
stuff.
these original modules. Now you can put that insert that into another place as well. So I could go further down here, say in between where it's where I've got the console C here and the tube. And again, I'll just right click, insert module. Whoops, go ahead to effects chain. And I can obviously go ahead and insert another audio effect there. So you can mix and match them. It's very easy to do, and it's done like that. Oh, by the way, are you?
That is super useful.
If you are, go ahead.
I did not know you. I did not know how to chain in the Pro Channels.
Yeah. And I had no idea that you could add all those different things in there as well as full effects chains.
I knew those were in there. But I did not know how to because like in the regular effects box it's easy to like organize what goes where, because you can drag and drop where you want, which effect you want to happen before the other one.
Yep.
In the Pro Channels, I didn't know what the logic was there as far as how this factors into like the processing on the track, or whether it does it before it goes to the effects. I just kind of like worked with what it did.
Yep.
The chaining
useful.
is the key there. That the chaining is the key there. Knowing that it's there and that's what it does.
Also, experimenting with the order of things makes a difference too, because we've talked about that before, about the order of the effects that you put in, or what's before what, and all of that.
With the Pro Channel, you're talking about EQ, compression, amps, everything that you would want to chain in a certain order. Otherwise, you're doing this before you run this through the amp, then is that what sound effect you want before you run it into the amp? Or do you want to EQ after you run it into the amp?
And even if standard wisdom, let's say, is always do it before the amp, it's worth trying it after, just to say whichever way it is, just to say it's worth trying it just to see what it sounds like.
Oh yeah, you should try no matter what. But like EQ, I tend to prefer to EQ towards the end of the signal chain, not at the beginning, unless there's something I'm trying to fix. If I'm using the EQ to fix something specifically, then yes, at the beginning of the chain, let's get rid of that splashy, crazy ass cymbal, or bring it down. Yep. But if I'm looking to use it to like boost the signal, because EQ is just as useful for boosting, then I want it at the end of the chain.
Yep. And something like a de-esser, for example, you would probably want that at the beginning of the chain.
Oh yeah,
so taking unnecessary noise out instead of sending it through and boosting it and doing all the other things to it. But at the same time,
any kind of noise removal is very beginning. Like this is the first shit that you run through before you start running it through spatial effects.
At the same time, you could get some pretty cool effects if you put those all at the end and let all that extra whatever come through. So it's again worth experimenting to see. Maybe you want that
Yeah.
sound of having it the other way, you know. But
Sometimes
general
I
knowledge.
imagine that's how Pink Floyd got some of the sound that they did,
Yeah.
by simply like trying it a different way, and it's like, whoa.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to try new things.
Just know why you do
You're
things
not-
a certain way to start.
Exactly. Yep. Understand why the rules are the way they are, and then when you break them, understand what you're doing when you break them.
Yes.
Good stuff.
Not finding this video useful, hit the dislike button with care. You may find that just a little bit of...
Oh, how could anybody hit dislike here?
If you like this kind of
Well, he
content,
did
make
say
sure you
you might find a
subscribe
little bit of your soul
and ring the
dies,
bell
so.
so that you're notified about my other videos. Now, back to this video. So this next tip falls into the category of an oldie but a goodie. But if you are new to Cakewalk, you may not know about this one. In fact, I'm not even sure how much longer you're going to be able to do this for. We'll talk about that later. But first of all, let's look at this scenario. I've got some virtual drums loaded up here. I'm using Addictive Drums 2. And then I've got the MIDI for those on the second track here. Okay, I'll play that quickly for you. Lovely, I'm sure. Now, if I double click on that track there, it opens up the piano roll here, and you can see that I've used a number of different drums in this groove. Now, it's sometimes to our advantage to have each of these drums on their own separate MIDI track. Aha, some of the old timers going, I know what he's going to do. Let's do it for the young folks, guys. So we'll just close that piano roll there. Okay. Now, before we do this, there's something we need to take note of. I'm just going to select this track here, which has got the MIDI on it, and in the inspector over here, I'm just going to go down to the bottom and just check the output there. Now, I know it's going to Addictive Drums. I'll just open that up there. You can see there's a number of different outputs available to me, and Addictive Drums is number 4. We just need to remember that number 4. Okay. Now, once we've done that, we've taken note of that, we're going to press Control and F1 on our keyboards. That opens up this file selector. Now, this has gone to a particular folder which has something in there called Cal scripts, C-A-L, not C-O-W. That would be silly. Okay, so we're going to go down to this one here, which is called...
These Cal scripts are awesome.
Now, with this first dialog,
I've been using them
we're going to select
forever.
our fourth track, so that's the second track there, so we'll change that to number 2, click on OK. Then the first destination track, I'm going to leave that as number 2, and then I'll click on OK. Then the destination channel, I'll leave that to 0. I don't know, 10 is a tradition for drums, but I think we can leave it on 0. I'll click on OK, and then the destination port. This is the number we had to remember. Remember, it was number 4 for Addictive Drums. So I'll just change that to number 4 there. Click on OK, and you can see it automatically takes each of those drums and assigns it onto a new track. I can play that again now. Now, this can be quite handy. You may want to handle these notes in different ways. I think especially when you're thinking about quantizing, for example, you may want to use different quantize settings for different tracks. You may not want to quantize some of the tracks, while you do want to quantize others. So this can be quite useful. However, I did mention at the beginning that you may not be able to do this forever. That's because these Cal scripts that I was talking about are something which is going to be phased out of Cakewalk at some point. I'm not sure what the technical term.
Oh man, they're gonna get rid of them.
Now, hopefully, fingers crossed, Cakewalk are going to make sure that they have some of these features built into Cakewalk before they get rid of Cal script. If you're watching Cakewalk, it would be nice.
They can't get rid of it if they don't.
This one, which is probably the most used of those Cal scripts. Take a look at them anyway and see which ones are useful to you.
It's basically it is a programming language for MIDI. It's like Python.
I have covered this.
Yep.
It allows you to do incredible things with MIDI real fast. They shouldn't actually get rid of it. My guess is if they are, it's for technical reasons.
Right. Or, the other one would be if they've already incorporated it all into the actual design of it and they don't need the external space. But I would be very surprised.
I still wouldn't get rid of the engine. The engine itself is useful because programmers, the beauty of MIDI is that it is data, and if I want to change the cowbell on that drum kit so that it's mapped somewhere else with MIDI and this ability to script like this, you can quickly like make a little script and say like replace this note with this other note, remap it.
Right.
And the cow scripts do that on a larger level where they'll split a MIDI track apart. If I wanted a drum kit and I wanted to take every single thing that's hit on that beat, I could break it up so that each one of those is on its own track.
Yep.
And
Definitely.
there's a cal script in there for that. Yeah. Now I'm sure they're going to incorporate that in like as a feature where you can just right click and do that. And they should do that. I'm all for like make some of these easier. There's only so many cal scripts that I've ever used. They're pretty standard ones. You want to split a MIDI track apart, like that one is super essential. Should already be built in.
Definitely. But again, like you were saying, having the engine there is important to me, because that would also be a good way to add
more
new
good
other
scripts
stuff.
can get made.
Exactly.
Yeah. Otherwise, then you become dependent on the programmers to do all that scripting. And
Yeah.
MIDI scripting is not a like DAW thing. It's a what are you trying to do with that music? How are you trying to break it up?
There's a way to do that.
Want to take all the Fs, put them on their own track? Like
Yep.
this.
You can make them all 20% louder.
Yes,
but only on Friday.
That's the other part of it that's super useful is the ability to like say go find, or what sometimes people use it for is for randomization. You've got this static drum beat. It's like everything is set to 127. A lot of MIDI programmers are horrible. They just jack everything up to 127. Every level, every hit is maximized because they think, that's not better. But you want to humanize that MIDI drum loop that you have. You can run a cal script on it that will run different levels across different things and do it in a way that humanizes it without ruining it.
And actually, I think one of the tips he's going to give us in a minute here is literally about doing some fixing on the velocities and how to make smoother transitions. Because, like, for example, like you're saying, you want this section to be quieter rather than just going from 127 on everything down to 90 in this section and then back up. You want to have it be a gentle transition.
That is the conundrum you will see in the MIDI world when you're dealing with MIDI files. That's the part of MIDI that isn't very human. And that's the part that people tend to complain, oh, it sounds like MIDI. Well, yeah, a lot of these files out of the box, they don't have emotion to them. You have to kind of give it.
Yep. And that's where you get all the different, different velocities. Some of these are lower, some of these are higher. So you're getting the emotion and dynamic range on a lot of the stuff.
Yeah, it's nice the way he's visualizing it because you can literally see it.
Exactly. Let's give him a minute here, see if he gets to that part.
For sandwiched somewhere in another video, so I still get a lot of messages about this, so I thought I'd cover it here again for you today. I'm going to be talking about the transform tool. This is a tool that we've got available to adjust some of our values when we're looking at some MIDI. So I've got my drums here that we were looking at earlier, and you can see I've got all of the velocity values open at the bottom here. Now if I want to make some changes to a lot of these at one time, of course it can be quite fiddly. You could select them like this at the top, like so, and then I can go ahead and adjust them all at once. That's kind of an okay way of doing it, but sometimes we want to do things a little bit more complex than that, so I'll undo that. So we switch on the transform tool by going down to the bottom left and just clicking here where it says transform, and then you can see the tool appears over the top of this velocity data here. Okay, so it's a kind of a range of things which have been selected there. Now you can change that range by grabbing the edge, okay, and then just selecting a different area like so. Okay, it doesn't actually make any changes yet. We can also use the top and the bottom to do that as well.
And that's cool because see what he was doing there? Filters to what will change.
Exactly. Like if you brought that bottom up over those low notes, you're only affecting the high notes.
Yes, anything above it won't get changed.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
edges. Okay, and now to go ahead and make some changes in there, I need to adjust one of these white circles. Okay, so I'm just going to do the straightforward one at the moment and adjust all of these velocities. I'm going to scale them all at once, so like so. You can see a little kind of a preview as you do it there, and then I can stop that there. Okay, so I've adjusted all of those velocities like that. I'll undo that again. Now if I wanted to do something like a ramp,
that's like strategic MIDI ducking, you know. That's a quick way to like have parts where you duck them out because you know that you're going to be putting other stuff that's going to need to take that.
It needs that space.
Take that stage, yeah.
Exactly. And the other thing that is like the problem would be that if you do that little adjustment just like that and drop these all to 50%, for example, then you would hear a harsh transition from the loud ones to the soft ones back to the loud ones. And he's going to go into that in a second here too on how to smooth that out in the same tool, which is very cool. I hadn't noticed it even, but there's a little square that's almost kind of hidden off to the side here. But he's
I know some of these little overlay icons are so subliminal that you almost don't ever know they're there.
But once somebody actually points them out to you and you see what they do, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So let's see here.
Corners, and then I can do this like so. And look at that.
Was
really
an idea of what's going to happen.
Oh,
they're really, really
fade
useful, for especially when you do
a MIDI fade out.
Now, if you were to do just a scale like I did a moment ago, let's do that again. You can see that quite often there's going to be an abrupt difference between what became before and what came after, okay? And that is going to definitely sort of show up in the sound of things. So we can actually apply something called soft mode to account for that. Just at the edge of the transform tool, you can see this little icon here that toggles the soft mode on and off. I'll switch it on now. You can see these little round here to indicate that it's on. Now, if I do the same adjustments again, you can see, if you look carefully at that preview, you can see that the changes at the edges are less dramatic than the changes in the middle. Okay, they're scaled a little bit differently. That means that as we make that adjustment, there's a bit of a blend.
Hence the soft mode.
And the after.
Totally makes sense.
Not just useful.
Totally makes sense. And look at the curve.
CCs,
look, you have a bowl now. Instead of like a fade out or a drastic shift, you literally turned it into a bowl.
Now, the other thing is once he toggled the mode with that one control on the side, there were also two other controls that you might not have noticed that are just a horizontal bar on the sides. And he's going to mention those now and what those are for.
Etc. like I have here, for example. Okay, so we can adjust also the sort of scaling of that soft mode. I'll undo again. Once we're in soft mode, you can see these extra bars appear at the beginning and the end. We can move those in and out. Okay, and that changes the sort of range of effect of that soft mode. Okay, so again, I'll make some adjustments, and you can see that I can make a really nice smooth transition now between these.
Get out.
Okay, if I switch off the transform tool,
that is cool.
Gradual at the edges there.
Now
so
you don't have a bowl; you have two bowls.
Organic
almost.
way to make changes
two bowls next to each other.
Some of your values in your MIDI.
Good stuff.
So I bet some of you have suffered from this problem and it drove you absolutely nuts. Well, fear not. I'm going to end your suffering, hopefully, well, at least in terms of this problem. So the situation is I've got this song loaded up and I want to go ahead and export it. Okay, so what you'd normally do is just go up to the top right here. I've got project selected, and then I'll click on export and I'll go through a few different options there. Now, what Cakewalk does is it's able to find where the end of the song is automatically for you, and it does that very, very well, except when it doesn't. Okay.
When there's something that like
in an unexpected way. In fact,
a lyric track that goes, a lyric track that's way off to the side.
3.5 minutes long or so. But I've found that the file is actually about 5.5 minutes long. Let me show you. I'm going to drag that file into this bottom track down here. Okay, drop it in there. Give it a moment to render. You can see it should be ending around about here, but in fact it's going on much longer than anything else. I'll just drag this to the side. Yep, there's definitely nothing else going on up here. So why has it exported this much longer? That's because Cakewalk thinks this song is that long. Why is it thinking that? Well, the key is in the fact that there are some things that may be hidden from view here. Okay, so let me just get rid of this here. And I'll delete
See
that
that
there,
big green
so I
bar
can
up at
show
the
you what I
top
mean.
there
Now we can
Yep.
sort of see
is the
this.
That's how long it
You
selection.
thinks.
can do select the
Yes.
first
I
track up here,
I
and
spend
then click
all
on
day
Control A
changing
to
that
select
thing.
all of the tracks. We can see that the selector up the top here has gone all the way up here. It's finding something in this area that we're not seeing
Yeah.
here. So what are some of the things that may be hidden from view that it's finding? Well, first of all, I would encourage you to open up your bus view. So I'm just going to click on this icon here to show the bus pane. Click on that, and I
Oh
will
yeah.
see the buses. Now,
Any
here
automation in
look
there.
at this here.
Yep.
I've got a little bit of automation on this strings channel here, and that automation is going all the way
It's so
up.
funny because I go through
You
this
need it
like
up there anymore. There's
every
no more
day.
sound. So
Nice.
I could just pop a node in there, just end it around about there, and just get rid of that last node. Okay, so I'll delete that. That's fine.
Yeah, when you do have automation, you have to treat it like a track.
I'll go ahead and
It,
select
it has
all
to
of
have
the
an
tracks.
end. If it doesn't have an end, then
It just goes on and on and
yes.
on. Yep.
And
Again,
you know,
Control A.
I didn't jump into automation for until last year. The first 30 years of my cakewalk, I avoided automation. It scared me.
I used it only for things like fade in, fade out, or like some panning stuff. But even that was I would use very little of. But once you showed me that Sonata surround and the ability to have the sound move around in the sound space, that just took all of the panning automation that I would have done previously and just simplified it.
Yeah, it simplifies the panning stuff. But there's other automation when it comes to changing effects, how much signal that you're sending to an effect and things like that. Now that's the level of automation I'm starting to get to. Levels and panning that's how you get into automation. I couldn't avoid it. I tried to avoid it every excuse I could. I could do it in MIDI, and I used to do it in MIDI, but MIDI's a horrible place to actually do that shit. You want to do it in the wave spectrum.
Another good one for that was something like there's a vocal, and on one particular line you want delay on, when he makes his one line, you wanted to give good delay on it. You could use that for automation, and you just jack up the delay just for that one spot, and then bring it back down. So something like that.
There's the most common one after you get done with the panning and the volume is having that delay effect and then removing it, as the guitar goes back into this part, but kicking it in for that little hook where the delay needs to echo it out and then remove it. I'm constantly removing that area effect.
Yep.
I use it for its sizzle and amplification, but you got to bring it back when you don't need it anymore. Otherwise, it'll sit there and echo for another minute after a song's done.
Yeah. Got to get those tails down.
Yep, it's still finding something else. Now, that would have caused that problem, but there's something else there as well. So another place I may look is up here. I'll go to
lyrics.
View. I'm going to look for tempo.
Lyrics. Oh, yeah. Now, the tempo has changed drastically in the last couple of months.
Tempo changes when the song was...
They have really modified the tempo track in the last couple of revisions. There's a lot more going on. They're giving it a lot more focus. It's really cool because, look at this. It really is like an automation lane now.
Yep. And that was the thing, is so many live tracks. Like if you wanted to reproduce something by Jimmy, for example, his timing is going to shift. It was a live performance. They were not on a metronome, and you would have to change, get a little bit more fluid with your timing to make it sound like what they did. And this is one of the places that you could make that happen.
If you take an audio file, how you were practicing off of that Fish track, was it Fish or the Dead?
That one was the Dead, but yeah, both.
Yeah, if you took that Dead track, brought it into Cakewalk, dropped it into that tempo track, Melodyne would analyze it and actually set all the tempo to the analyzed file. You would see constant changing. It would never be just one thing all the way across.
Yep. Because they're always speeding up, always slowing down. It's part
There's
of the
a lot.
ebb and flow.
there's a lot of even just analog tempo changing going on there. A recording that went on to tape and then, through a computer and digitized, the tempo can't stay a perfect constant. Not to something like Melodyne. When Melodyne's analyzing, especially the high level one, it'll pick up a percent of beats per minute change. It doesn't go from 120 to 119. It goes from 120 to 119.7.
Right. It wants to be very specific about that.
It's extremely specific unless you tell it not to be.
Which is good.
As much long
Good and bad. If
Yeah.
you're working on a project and laying down tracks and you're really sticking to a tempo, you might not want it to float too much on the on your master tempo track.
Right. One thing I'm wondering is if
it
you
is
took
kind of nice when the master tempo track is somewhat consistent to follow.
now, if we had done, like, taking that Grateful Dead song as an example, if I had gone in and I did the song to a metronome, for example, so I did have everything timed out as it, as I would think it should be based on a metronome, and then dragged in that tempo track, would it readjust the rest of the track based on that?
I bet you there is a fucking scripting or technique so that you can calibrate an audio track tempo to a consistent one. I'm sure there's a technique to do that.
But at the same time, I would have just been better off
because
rather
that's
than
quantizing.
playing along to it. Right.
That's quantizing.
Yep. But I probably would have been better off just doing like you had said, drag the track in, have it create the tempo track for me, and then just use that click and just play along to that click.
And you literally would have a tempo track with an actual MIDI click to it.
Sweet.
It would float just like the audio, but it would float like the audio.
It would float the right way.
Yeah, the natural way. Humans float.
And it's seeing those as a part of the song. So I'll just delete those two tempo change nodes there. Okay, they're gone. Let me go ahead and select all again. So I'll select that first track, Control A. Look at that range selector at the top now. Looks about right, doesn't it? Okay, so just keep in mind when you're trying to diagnose this problem, there may be things hidden from view. They may not always be notes. They may be things like tempo tracks,
lyric tracks.
Kind of data or things,
lyric tracks.
If you like. Now, talking about events, another way that you can diagnose this is to use the events list. Now, I'm not going to give you a full tutorial on the events list, but just in case you don't know, I'll just select all of those tracks again, Control A, and I'm going to press Alt 8. That brings up the events list.
The most important part of Cakewalk right here.
Happening in the song, okay? It shows you the start time of those events and what kind of events they are. There's lots of note events here. So you could scroll down towards the end. I
don't know how people use any other DAW.
That'd be another way you may be wanting to diagnose it. Now, if all of that fails, if you're just in a hurry, you haven't got time to mess around with this stuff, then just select a range, okay? So what you would do in this case is just use that range selector at the top there, drag it to where you want it. In this case, I'll just put it just after where I can see the last bit of music that I want. And then when you export, just change this at the top right to selection, okay? And then it's only going to export that particular range of the music. Be a little bit careful with this. There can be things that sort of happen after the last note has been played. Let's say, for example, you had an abrupt end to this and there was a MIDI note right in the end. It was the very last note, but you had lots of reverb applied to that, and you wanted that echoey kind of sound or reverb sound to sort of decay out past the end of that last note. Just be mindful of that because you're not going to see that here, okay? I hope that is helpful because, I know it's driven a lot of people absolutely bonkers in the past. What I love about making these videos is there will always
it drove me bonkers for like 6 months.
Tell me how I could have done things just a little bit better, and I very much appreciate that. So make sure you read some of the comments down below so that you can find out about any extra little tips to go along with what I've showed you today. Also, let me know in the comments down below which one of these was most useful to you. I'd love to hear about that. Now, don't forget to check the link in the description for my patreon.com, where for as little as $1 per month you can help me help you by making more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.
And again, that's Mike from Creative Sauce, and definitely worthwhile tips. All kinds of good stuff that he's got there.
Mike kicks ass on the cakewalk tips. He kind of snipes right at the ones that are the most time saving, the most productivity encouraging, because the first 5 tips were all nice aesthetic productivity tips. These were fantastic for me, especially MIDI tips.
Yeah. Definitely good. I'm just kind of scrolling through his page to see all kinds of stuff, faster mixes, better mixes, home studio setup, and just all
And
kinds of crazy good
and
stuff.
and because he's not just like focusing on like one DAW or even DAWs themselves and going after like the plugins and things, he's got so many good topics.
Got one here,
I mean,
Cakewalk audio stretching. That's a good one.
yeah, and that's one that took me a long time to understand the approach with Cakewalk, because when you try to manipulate waves in Cakewalk, I was used to things like Fruity Loops and in the old days Acid. How you stretch things in the old days when I first came back to Cakewalk, and I don't normally stretch my waves. I don't like to, but once in a while you do want to for specific reasons. And when I first tried to do it in Cakewalk, when I came back to it, I was like, what the hell? Why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And having to figure out how to turn on the stretch property is the first obstacle in why you can't just stretch things out of the box until you flip a switch,
Yeah.
unless you're dealing with a specific sound that was designed to stretch. When you're dropping stuff in from the library down into the tracks, you can drop certain kinds of files that are like drum loops and shit that are ready to stretch. They're in loop mode as far as Cakewalk's concerned, and then you can stretch them and loop them, and it starts to feel like it's Sony Acid again.
Right, right. Looks like we're starting to come up on pumpkin time here.
Oh, pumpkin time, huh? Well, that filled my head with all sorts of tips that I am definitely going to be rethinking my setup. Snave was talking about how nice templates were, and I was just thinking, like, I need to remake my templates for
Yeah.
my setup the way it is. I set it up pretty good about a year and a half ago, but things have changed. Cakewalk has changed. I've got more equipment. I think it's time for me to remake my templates based on some of this information. How I name and sort things, I already have a certain structure, but with that sorting tip that he gave in the first video, I'm now thinking, like, if I do things this way, I can really narrow down how things line up when I'm looking at them in the console and on the playlist.
Definitely. Lots of food for thought on that.
Yeah, yeah, the brain's exploding.
Mhm.
So before we turn into pumpkins, thank you anybody who's here, and I hope you got some good cakewalk tips out of that like I did. I mean, I spend 10, 12 hours a day in cakewalk, and I still learned a shitload out of that.
Yep. Definitely helps you get started. If you're just getting started, there's some great tips in there for that. If you've been doing it for 30 years, there's some great tips in it for that. So it's something for everybody.
I haven't been getting started, and there was a chock load of information in there that I'm like ready to soak up now. Now I can apply it.
Exactly. So once again, thanks to Tony and thanks to Angie for hosting.
Oh, special thanks to Ange.
And thanks
It's
to everybody for
always
coming out.
great
Our
to
big pumpkin.
talk IT with Glenn and Tony every Thursday night. Have a great night, everyone. Till tomorrow night,
Everyone.
when we F Friday. Thanks for choosing Angified. Good night, all.
We're gonna F it, huh?
On Friday.